So it's 34 minutes past. It's Thursday. It's the 22nd of May. So welcome everybody to a webinar hosted by Leicestershire and Rutland's NHS. This is something that we've started to do more frequently after a bit of an engagement that we did with young people and parents and carers quite recently. Something was highlighted that a lot of parents are wanting more sort of information and informative sort of webinars around sort of how to support their young people with health issues. And so, yes, this is part of our attempt to connect parents and carers and teachers with medical professionals who can sort of give some hints and tips on how to support your children. So tonight we have Dr. Nishani, who's a consultant and paediatrician at Leicester Children's Hospital, and he will be speaking about the screendemic. So I'll hand over to him. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I will monitor them as we go along through the evening, and we should have time for a Q&A at the end of tonight's session. So thank you, Dr. Nishani. Over to you.
Thank you, Jacob. Can you see that?
Yes, we've got all the slides are up. There we go. Yes, we're up on your first slide.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Thank you. Jacob, thanks very much for inviting me. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me on this talk about the screendemic. My name is Sanjeev Nishani. I'm a consultant pediatrician here at the Leicester Children's Hospital, and I've coined the term the screendemic. The screendemic is the epidemic of mental health illness in children and young people, as well as early developmental language problems in childhood in the early years, secondary to excessive screen time and social media use. I'm going to start with a fairly dramatic statement made not by me, but by a very prolific, renowned psychologist in the US, but I do agree with this statement. Dr. Twenge says that a nuclear bomb has exploded on teens' social life. Every indicator of mental health and psychological well-being has become more negative amongst teens and young adults since 2012. I'm going to be talking about 2010, 11, and 12 quite a lot during this presentation. The trends are stunning in their breadth, consistency, and size. And all of these rapid changes coincide with what she says is the incorporation of smartphones into our lives, which has allowed a nearly non-stop engagement with social media apps. Now, let me give you a snapshot of what's happening in Leicester and Leicestershire. Every 5 years, Leicester City Council undertakes a well-being survey of children. The last survey was published in 21-22. 3,000 Leicester students completed the survey, and it found some of the following. Number one, over a quarter of children spend 5 or more hours per day on screens, and I can guarantee you that number has gone up. Older children, 14, 15-year-olds, have a higher likelihood of poor health and well-being choices, such as sleeping late and excessive screen time. 36%, 1 in 3, have excessive screen time. And those who spend 5 or 6 hours each and every day on screens, and I'm talking about recreational or non-educational screen times, are addicted. There's no other way of defining this or looking at that. Children are spending more time looking at the screens than doing anything else, and that has gone up progressively from the previous survey of 2016-17 to 22%, up to 27% in 21-22, and I can guarantee you it's more than 30% now. The most popular after-school screen activity is screen time activities. About half of the children are completing less than half an hour physical activity a day, and 1 in 10 are completing less than half an hour a week. 1 in 3 children have never been to a leisure center. 2 out of 5 children, nearly 40%, are sleeping late, 11 p.m. or later, and are at risk of not getting enough sleep. I'm going to pause here to briefly talk about sleep. Now, most of us might assume that sleep is a passive process. Actually, it's one of the most active functions in our body. During sleep, the brain rests, it regenerates. All the metabolites, or many of the metabolites that get generated during a very active day, get washed out. Memories get embedded, and sleep allows the brain to get ready for activities of the next day. It's very, very important. There's more and more focus on sleep, as well as more and more evidence that those adults, children, and youngsters who don't sleep adequately have lots and lots of medical problems. Now, NHS statistics also pretty stark. 1 in 4 in 17-year-olds in 2022 had a probable mental health disorder. That's an increase from 1 in 6 in 2021. The most recent statistics we have, from England in 2023, show 20%, 1 in 5, 8 to 25-year-olds had a probable mental health disorder. Now, what's happening across the pond? There's also been a massive increase in mental health difficulties amongst adolescents. Teen depression doubled between 2011 and 2021. Again, 2011 I mentioned. 1 out of 3 teen girls in the US has seriously considered suicide. The most senior doctor in the US, Dr. Vivek Murthy, did a review of the literature, and he found quite conclusively that the deterioration, the collapse in teen mental health well-being coincides with the internet, with smartphone ownership, with social media app use. And he described the adolescent mental health as a crisis of our time. In May 2023, he issued an advisory to the entire American population talking about this causal link that he's found after review of the literature between excessive screen time, social media app use, and the collapse in mental health well-being. Unfortunately, so far, our government and our public health, the chief medical officer, the Royal Colleges are doing nothing. In my opinion, sadly, they are asleep at the wheel, whilst thousands and thousands of children are being affected each and every day. Now, this graph looks at what children are doing currently. I've already touched upon this. Nearly 80% of children spend 2 or more hours on social media each and every day. Now, when I was growing up, I spent most of my time outside school practicing hobby, leisure, or reading. Now, you might argue, well, that's because I'm an old fuddy-duddy, which is true. However, my response to that is actually that I grew up in a play-based childhood. Children are currently growing up in a phone-based and a phone-controlled childhood. And I will let you decide which you think is the healthier version. Now, this graph looks at the increase in depression amongst girls, and I have to add a rider here. This only focuses on girls. However, boys are not far behind. This graph looks at the increase in incidence of mental health difficulties and depression, anxiety amongst girls starting roughly around the same time frame, 2008, 9, and 10. And it shows that it's gone up dramatically. At the same time, there's been a dramatic use of increase in smartphone ownership, social media app use, and the internet. The researchers looked at other factors to potentially explain this dramatic worrying rise in mental health difficulty amongst girls. They looked at unemployment, which in fact had dropped during the same time period. Now, is this restricted to the US and the UK only? No, not at all. Most Anglophile countries, most English-speaking countries have seen a dramatic deterioration in mental health amongst teenagers, girls and boys both. So this graph looks at admissions to A&E for mental health difficulties, and you can see a very dramatic increase both for boys and girls, starting again roughly around 28, 29, 2010. Let's look at some evidence that I was talking about. I said there's a lot of evidence, and just focus on some of the evidence. And I've looked at the evidence starting from early childhood. One of the things that got me really intrigued in this topic, and then latterly, as I unearthed the evidence, horrified about what I'm seeing, is the advent of non-verbal children. Now, non-verbal children are toddlers, 2 or 3-year-olds, who come into clinic. They walk into my clinic with normal mobility, normal coordination. They do not say a word. They have this glazed look on their faces, and they are drawn to inanimate objects. Now, many, not all, but many of these children, when you delve into what's happening at home, you discover that they are spending their entire waking hours in front of a screen, as are their parents, a lot of the time. Now, as you all know, learning is a very active process. You learn vocabulary by hearing words from friends, family, parents, grandparents, siblings, and interacting with your environment. Sitting in front of a screen, being hypnotized by a screen, is a passive process where you're hearing sounds and you're seeing images. It's passive compared to the active way we normally and should learn language. Now, this study looked at screen time and parent-child talk from infancy to 3 years of age, and it concluded, I'm just talking about the conclusions. Reduced interaction between children and parents is associated with delayed language development and a reduced ability of children to interact with others. In other words, if a toddler is stuck in front of a screen, their ability to interact with others and with their environment is severely impaired, setting them up for great difficulties going forward. Another very large study, again published in a very reputed journal, as was the last study, looked at 7,100 mother-child pairs, conclusively demonstrated greater screen time for children aged 1 year was associated with developmental delays in communication and problem solving at the age of 2 and 4. And this talks about even 1 hour of screen time in infancy can do this to children. So imagine a child goes to preschool or to school with such difficulties, they're going to really, really struggle. And we know this can be avoided by limiting the amount of screen time. Language association between screen use and child language skills, a very large study, 19,000 children, again published in the Journal of Medical Association, a highly reputed journal, showed the following. Greater quantity of screen use, hours per use, was associated with lower language skills. If you must give your toddler a screen, give them educational programs. And also, if you must give your toddler a screen, the best way to do that is co-viewing with them, because that was associated with stronger child language skills. Later age at screen onset use was also associated with stronger child language skills. If a child can't communicate, how is that child going to progress in life? What is the need to give a toddler a smartphone or a device? Human beings have been around for millions of years. And have developed very well without these devices. Why are they so essential? Now, as I said, I'll be looking at the entire spectrum. What about adolescence? What does the research tell us about adolescence? Again, a very large study, nearly 13,000 adolescents, looked at the effect of social media on mental health and well-being amongst young people in England. It's a longitudinal study, which means that these teenagers were studied over a period of time, and it came up with a few very stark conclusions. Persistent, very frequent social media use predicted lower well-being amongst girls for life satisfaction, for happiness, and was associated with greater anxiety. The association of high social media use and mental distress amongst boys was also very significant. Another study, adding to this increasing body of evidence, a study of 6,600 adolescents showed that, and listen to this, adolescents who spend more than 3 hours per day on social media face double the risk of poor mental health outcomes, including depression and anxiety. And this is shocking and worrying in equal measure. Now, we all know, and you've read in the papers and you've seen around you in society, that the number of children being diagnosed with ADHD and autism has increased dramatically. Now, that's an entirely different topic in itself. I'll touch on one or two things very briefly. There is a condition called acquired ADHD, which is different from, let's call it, primary ADHD. In other words, teenagers who spend hours and hours on screens can develop symptoms very similar or identical to ADHD. Difficulties with emotional regulation, inattention, hyperactivity, poor sleep. And the reason for that is quite simple. Excessive screen time, as demonstrated in very sophisticated functional MRI scans, affect two particular parts of the brain, exactly the same parts of the brain that are affected in primary ADHD. So you can get symptoms of ADHD if you spend too much time on screens. And indeed, the corollary of that is children with primary ADHD, their behavior manifestations can actually get worse if they spend too much time on screens. Now, many of you might have heard of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, which is an international organization that looks at various aspects of life on this planet. They conduct an educational assessment every 3 years. It's called PISA, Program for International Student Assessment. It's highly reputed. It's the world's most famous measure of student ability. The most recent assessment was published in December 2023, and it came up with 4 very stark conclusions. Number one, again, since 2012, the advent of smartphones and social media, grades have progressively dropped across 80 countries. Number two is fairly obvious. If you spend less time on your devices after school, you do better do better scholastically. Point number 3, really concerning. Phones in class not only distract the owner, but the person, but students around the person with the phone. In my opinion, there's no ifs, there's no buts, no question of guidelines. Phones must be banned in school, 16 and below. And of course, parents do want to understandably keep in touch with their children. There are many other ways of doing that. There's a retro phone, there's a brick phone, there are rebel phones which have GPS tracking available. You do not have to have social media apps. We need to get smart about the fact that these smartphones, so-called smartphones, are causing great damage to our children. Point number 4, which goes back to my point about a phone-controlled and a phone-based childhood. Nearly half of students across the 80 countries said they felt anxious or nervous when they did not have their digital devices near them. In other words, this goes back to our contention. Children are living in a phone-based and a phone-controlled childhood. When Facebook was rolled out in 2008 and 2009, a research study was done across the US population, university population, and they concluded that the introduction of Facebook may have contributed to 300,000 more cases of depression because of the FOMO, peer pressure, this utopia that Facebook seems to show, demonstrate in the virtual world, which of course we know doesn't exist in the real world. And that can have great detrimental effects. As I mentioned briefly already, there are lots and lots of studies looking at very clever, sophisticated MRI scans of the brain, which show that frequent social media use may be associated with distinct changes in the developing brain. The human brain is developing until the early 20s, something called neuroplasticity, and I'll talk about that a bit later on. And the human brain is very prone to abnormalities due to excessive screen time and social media app use. The 2 parts of the brain which are particularly vulnerable are the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. These 2 parts of the brain are essentially there to ensure that we conduct ourselves in a civilized, moderate, proportional manner. They're there for emotional regulation, for impulse control. And as I've already mentioned, the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain also affected in primary ADHD. Just the prefrontal cortex you can see on the left, and just behind that, the amygdala. Another study shows high social media use was associated with a reduced volume of different parts of the brain responsible for psychological well-being. Now, generally speaking, in medicine, if a healthy part of the body shrinks, any part that might be, then that is bad news. So this study showed a reduced volume of different parts of the brain, and there are other studies showing thinning of the brain due to excessive social media and social media app use and screen time. And exactly the same applies for gaming. Let's be very clear about that. Now, there are lots of skeptics. I have stated quite boldly that actually, in my opinion, and having looked at the research, having seen what I see in my clinics each and every day, there's a very clear causal link. It's not a correlation, it's a causal link between excessive screen time and social media use and the collapse of mental health, well-being, and communication language difficulties in early childhood. There are other researchers who actually don't buy that theory or that premise. So academics in the US looked at 13 other explanations for the adolescent mental health crisis, and they concluded none of them work. Only smartphones plus social media can explain the international collapse in mental health since the early 2010s. Now, if you look at the four main apps, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, etc., they will tell, and Twitter, they will tell you that the users would need to be at least 13. Of course, we know that's cosmetic. It means it's completely meaningless. In March 23, TikTok introduced an alert an hour after use. And that, of course, again, is cosmetic and can be overridden. The United Nations has recommended a ban for mobile phones of children under 16. And that's been implemented by various European countries. You know about Australia banning smartphones for under 16. And lots of other countries now waking up to the fact that the social media and screen time are very detrimental to our children. Now, this is a fascinating and equally infuriating slide, and please pay attention to this. So, TikTok, the ubiquitous TikTok, is owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance. The same company, ByteDance, offer a TikTok equivalent in China on the right. Now, let me tell you the salient features of Douyin, which is what Chinese children and the Chinese public are exposed to. Number one, its use is capped at 40 minutes. The content must be scientific, cultural, educational, wholesome human stories. The content is reviewed by moderators. Tech companies must facilitate positive content to protect child mental health. The app is unavailable between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. In other words, they want their children to sleep. They know the importance of sleep. They're supposed to popularize fitness channels and health programs, and influencers are banned. In the rest of the world, I'm sure you'll agree with me, it's the poisonous Wild West. The Chinese clearly know what it does to mental health of children, indeed adults, and yet they are allowed this to proliferate cynically across the rest of the world. Now, as I said, people are waking up to this. 42 American states have sued Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, alleging it's fueled a mental health crisis amongst young people. And what they are saying, and something we have discovered in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, is that the reason the vast majority of people on this planet, the reason civilization has been upended by social media apps in the last 15 years is for two things. Number one, these algorithms that run these apps are addictive. They cause a release of dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical that makes you feel good, that causes elation. And when you pick up the phone, you go on the app, you feel good. However, when you put the phone down, you want that dopamine rush again. And 3 or 4 hours later, you're stuck in front of that phone, scrolling mindlessly. And this is how children, adults, teenagers, everybody gets trapped by these cynical algorithms. Now, I've shown you some evidence about the damaging, the devastating, the poisonous effects of social media and screen time on children and young people across the ages. I'm just going to run through quickly some slides with actually studies looking at what happens when you reduce screen time. And there are many studies looking at university students, and basically they've found that limiting social media to 30 minutes in this study and another study improved subjective well-being, self-reported happiness, life satisfaction, depression, anxiety by 25 to 40%, a staggering improvement. Another study, again, in university graduates in the US, our findings strongly suggest that limiting social media to approximately 30 minutes per day may lead to significant improvement in well-being. And this says the same thing. Now, I'm going to focus a bit on these two studies next. I mentioned neuroplasticity, i.e. the ability of the brain to evolve and recover indeed. One of the reasons teenagers, even without screens and social media, have such difficulties, we did as teenagers ourselves, is because the brain is evolving. And literally what happens during teenage years is that the wires are getting crisscrossed. That's literally what happens. Wires get crossed in the process of pathways being embedded, which is why the teenagers behave the way they do. Now, this study looked at physical activity in children, a very reputed journal, published in 2023. It was a longitudinal study over a 4-year period, so a study period children over 4 years, and this showed conclusively that physical activity is tied to an increase in brain volume. Physical activity is tied to an increase in brain volume in regions involved in cognition, emotional learning, and psychiatric illness. So in other words, because our brains are neuroplastic, if there are brain changes secondary to spending far too long on screens and apps, those changes can be reversed because of the factual existence of neuroplasticity. The next study is even more impressive. This was published again early last year. Nearly 2 million participants in Taiwan, a longitudinal study, meaning they were studied over a period of time. It showed that children and adolescents who are more active with greater physical fitness exhibited lower incidence of anxiety, depression, depressive disorders, and ADHD. Notably, enhanced cardiorespiratory fitness, muscular endurance, and power were independently associated with reduced mental health disorder incidences. In other words, physical activity is not just good for your heart, for your lungs, for your muscles, but equally good for your brain, which is why I recommend very strongly more green time, less screen time. Now, the campaign talking about the screendemic is not at all suggesting that we must stop going on screens, of course. Screens, apps have invaded our lives. They are embedded in our lives. We know about EdTech, and we can talk about that briefly. So this is about moderation. This is about being reasonable. This is about being proportionate. This is about being families, parents, and children, particularly parents who have to lead by example, being in control of their own habits. So what do I recommend as to the appropriate amount of screen time for 0 to 18 years and indeed for adults? Number one, so I've created a 5-a-day infographic. This has been accepted by NHS England and is on the Health for Under 5's website. Tip number one, screen time for birth to 0 to 2 years. The only screen time should be video chatting. Tip number two, the maximum screen time for 2 to 5-year-olds should be no more than 30 minutes. I gave you some graphic evidence as to why that's the case. Tip number three, opticians are telling us there's been a massive increase in the incidence of children needing glasses because focusing on small screens causes eye strain, and that can cause lots of problems. So if you must give your child a screen, give your child a bigger screen. Tip number four, parenting is difficult. Of course it is. Bringing up children is not easy. And there are instances when you have to use a digital device to set your child. Of course, we all understand that. However, avoid using a digital device to set your child, i.e., a digital device is not a digital pacifier, a digital babysitter, or a digital dummy. Please. Tip number 5, sleep hygiene. Avoid giving a screen or a phone to under 5, so at least 2 hours before bedtime. Institute a regime that might involve a bath, reading, anything else but a screen. What about older children? For 6 to 10-year-olds, what do we say? Tip number 1, please do not let your children go onto apps first thing in the morning. That causes a release of dopamine, and studies are demonstrating that that release of dopamine reduces their ability to concentrate during the school day. Tip number 2, as I said, this is not about stopping, banning, etc. None of those deluded possibilities. This is about being moderate, being proportionate, being sensible, being in charge of your phone rather than the other way around. So we say that for 6 to 10-year-olds, recreational screen time, including gaming, should be 1 to 1.5 hours per day. And on weekends, so that's on weekdays, on weekends, not more than 2 hours per day. For 11 to 17-year-olds and adults, we say recreational screen time should be not more than 2 hours per day and not more than 2 or 3 hours on weekends. Physical activity, I've given you 2 very powerful research studies showing that physical activity is really good for the brain as well as the rest of the body. More green time, less screen time. Tip number 4, screen-free time together. Please, when you're having meals at home, in a restaurant, when you're in the car for short journeys, when you're in supermarkets, please, please put your phones away. Go back to doing what human beings are programmed to do, i.e. interact with each other. Tip number 5, again, sleep hygiene. Avoid screens 1 hour before bedtime. If possible, charge phones outside the bedroom. There are many other ways of many other gizmos that can act as a mobile, as an alarm clock rather than mobile phones. And put the phones on silent. You can use the grayscale to make these screens less addictive and attractive, particularly to younger children. It's thought that the blue light reduces the production of melatonin, the sleep hormone. And the reason I'm suggesting rather than not giving your children screens under 5 is because Ofcom tell us, looking at the practices in families around the country, that 25% of 5 to 7-year-olds have a smartphone. I have to ask why. 75% of 5 to 7-year-olds have a tablet. Again, I must ask why. What is the need? Now, the brain is not a muscle. However, the brain is the most active organ in our body, responsible for 25% of the metabolism in our body. It's not a muscle, but it behaves like a muscle. In other words, after a certain amount of activity and after a period of time, the brain starts to struggle. There's a happy medium, which you can see, and after a while, focusing, staring at flashing images in front of a screen starts to cause brain strain, and that's when the brain starts to struggle, and that's the next result. We see lots of children not sleeping adequately, not performing, avoiding school because they're struggling in school, inattention, they can't concentrate, etc., etc. And going back to what I strongly recommend is a total ban of mobile phones in schools. What happens when that was done? It boosted efficiencies of teachers because they'd actually focused on teaching rather than keeping children in check. More reading, improved teacher morale and retention, less missed class absenteeism, children, because of FOMO, going to the bathroom to check their phones, more vibrant lunchrooms, children talking to each other rather than being hypnotized by screens, less cheating and less reported stress among students. Now, lest you adults listening to this talk think that adults are immune to the effects of the screen demic, think again. You will hear more and more about this. That's an entity called digital dementia. Digital dementia can be seen in those who spend their entire vocational day, which is understandable if you have a job that mandates you sit in front of a screen. That's understandable, of course it is, but spend their entire vocational days in front of a screen as well as their recreation time in front of screens, weekdays and weekends. You are at greater risk of digital dementia. This study looked at 500,000 participants, a massive study, and also demonstrated very clear changes in certain areas of the brain that I've already alluded to. The obesity epidemic is also linked to this. Now, this might be a cartoon, but actually it's very representative of what nursery teachers are telling us, for instance. Nursery teachers are telling us that when children are dropped off, they're not crying when their parents are leaving, they're crying when their devices are being taken away from them, that they were watching slavishly in the car on the way to the nursery. And that's now backed up by research evidence published summer last year. Early childhood tablet use and outbursts of anger. So those children who spend hours on lots of time on tablets have difficulty regulating their frustration, their anger. That can last until early school years. Again, you're setting them up for difficulty going to school with all those problems. And hot off the press, published May 2025, and this is really, really important. Ultimately, children learn habits predominantly from their parents. So this study looked at parental technology use in a child's presence and health and development in early child years. A review of many studies looking at 15,000 participants from 10 countries. They concluded parents' use of technology in their child's presence was negatively associated with cognitive, psychosocial, and screen time amongst young children. So what's the way forward? We've got to go back to basics. We've got to go back to the play-based childhood. We've got to take back control from the phones who are controlling us and our children. Humans are social creatures, and interfering with the laws of evolution and creation, whatever you believe in, leads to severe problems such as the screendemic. And tackling the screendemic will require systemic, and societal change. And I've already said, of course, bringing up children is not easy. The old adage, it takes a village to raise a child, is particularly true today. But adults have got to be role models, particularly because adults themselves are not immune to this. There must be a balance between screen time and engagement with the real world, what we call more green time, less screen time. And otherwise, this is where we're headed. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Nishani. I think there's some powerful things in that presentation. I think something that sort of stood out for me was, that acquired ADHD, the soaring benefits of cutting down your social media to 30 minutes a day, and the digital dementia. That was quite frightening. And I think probably we all know this as well. That sort of we know that our children look up to us and copy what we do. So we need to be setting better examples as well. But we've got a few questions in the chat. So please feel free, everybody, to if you have any questions, to put them into the chat. But I'll kick off with a couple to start with. So we've got a bit more of a comment first, saying that the problem is that nurseries are expecting children to be iPad literate, and some parents then feel that they have to make sure that their child can use an iPad.
Yeah, and which is why I've recognized EdTech, and I'll talk about this, and then I'll talk about EdTech very quickly. Hence my recommendation of 30 minutes and not more. So children are very smart, and they will learn to use an iPad in 30 minutes, but that keeps it limited. It makes sure that the children are not slaves to the screen, that's all they look forward to, and it ticks the boxes of nurseries needing the children to know how to use iPads. Going back to EdTech has been rolled out across the country. Yes, the pandemic gave that a lot of impetus, but actually research is now telling us that the EdTech revolution is probably failing. Sweden has abandoned it and gone back to notebooks, to pens, papers, pencils, the old-fashioned but an extremely effective way of educating children, because they've realized that a child sitting in front of a computer and getting emojis and likes and whatever whatever these programs do is not in their interest. And also, a study published recently showed that when children are studying, thanks to EdTech, thanks to the social media app screens, etc., they have to look at their phones every 10 minutes while studying for exams. Every 10 minutes. So the ability to concentrate has plummeted dramatically because of the algorithms and the dopamine, etc.
I think just to follow up on that, we've got a Senko in the chat, and she has highlighted that iPad literacy technology was removed as a stream in the early years curriculum some years ago. So parents can push back on nurseries about that. So thank you for that. We've got another question. Yes, one around. Could you define the types of screen times that are issues? You know, is there more being? Well, you've commented about the things being done about sort of schools and you know, sort of homework being delivered online and that kind of stuff. But then also, does screen time apply to TV as well?
That's a really good question. No. So, well, yes and no. So yes, in that the limits apply, because if your child is spending more than 2 hours on television, they're not out. Even in winter, there are things that they can be doing, however cold it might be. You know, countries that are much colder than we are, like Norway, etc., they have lots of activities in winter. So the time limit applies. But specifically for TVs are often a communal experience. B, to stating the obvious, they can't be put in your pocket and then taken to a room, and the child can't then disappear because they've got a TV in their pockets. So it's also at a greater distance, causing less eye strain usually. So there's lots of things about TVs which are not as bad as smartphones and devices, but the time limits must apply.
Okay, moving on. We've got so as a Senko, I'm receiving more and more requests for referrals to community pediatrics. Given the long waiting times, is there any guidance on that CPEDs could provide that we could give to parents who want to refer on these sorts of issues? We can give them some advice, but it would be good to have something backed by the authorities of pediatrics, as this could be better accepted by parents.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. As Jacob knows, I'm trying very hard to get this disseminated. The infographic, for instance, get it disseminated across primary schools, secondary schools, get the Integrated Care Board, which is overseeing health for children in the county, in LLR, etc. So that is a work in progress. And hopefully the schools your children go to should have access to the infographic, which is backed by NHS England, which is based on WHO recommendations, NICE recommendations, and American Academy of Pediatric recommendations.
So we've got a couple of comments around. Have you got any sort of advice or tools to help sort of parents when their kids are sort of asking them for, you know, their mobile phone or whether they can play Minecraft? Any kind of tips around that?
Yeah, it's not easy. I'd say, first of all, you please do lead by example. Secondly, you know, this is not about, and ultimately you're in charge. You have a choice here. A, you are in charge, but B, the choice is, if your child, your teenager is spending hours and hours on these screens, Minecraft, whatever it might be, and you are now aware that this could potentially be damaging, causing abnormalities in parts of the brain and damaging the life prospects, as the person in charge, you're going to have to take a stand. Now, hypothetically, let's say that your teenager is spending 5 or 6 hours. That is an addiction. We normally don't recommend stopping cold turkey because that will be very destructive. It will cause huge amounts of angst and be a furore at home. So I would then recommend shrinking down slowly. Of course, blame the doctors. You can use the infographic, blame the science, but starting off with no phones at mealtime, starting off, as I've already said, no phones in the restaurant, in the car for brief journeys, etc., etc. And then you can go from 5 or 6 hours slowly but surely down to what should be more acceptable, more appropriate, or moderate, like the 2 hours. Get them involved in housework. There has to be a carrot and stick approach, of course, but ultimately the bottom line is, A, you're in charge, you're the adult here, and you know that not doing anything is going to be to the great detriment of your child. So you've got to take a stance.
And we have another question around, how do you manage when parents feel too much screen time is bad and the other parent doesn't?
Yeah, really difficult. I would suggest, there are lots of people doing talks about this. I'm doing another talk on the 26th of June. If you can coax that person to get onto my talk, they can see all the evidence, actually. And in fact, I'm happy for this talk to be shared as well. So if Jacob is happy to, Jacob's got the talk, he's happy to share this, then they can look at the evidence themselves.
Absolutely, yes. So everybody here today, we will be sending around sort of the slides and also a recording of today's webinar, so you can share it with your loved ones and share it across your parent WhatsApp groups with your classmates. Yeah. And
I think the bottom line is blame the doctors. That's the bottom line, because we are the experts in child health. This is what we are seeing in our clinics, and this is what the research is telling us. And hopefully, when the government come on board, because I think they're asleep at the wheel, then you can also blame the government, and that makes it easier to have the dispute at home. That you don't have a choice.
And do you think there'll be a backlash from children one day, where they will it will get to a point where they see their parents are spending so much time on their phones that the kids might turn around and sort of say, well, actually, we've seen this with sort of kids whose parents are alcoholics, and they decide to abstain.
For sure. There are a few things. There are lots of lots of teenagers who themselves have realized that they've been imprisoned by these apps, by the phones. There are lots of children who say that, and head teachers tell us this, that when parents are standing outside the school gates after school, and their children rush to them, A, for an embrace, and B, to excitedly tell them what happened during the school day, the parents barely look up from their phones. And yes, there will be a backlash, because parents are, being the role models, parents are addicted. There's no question about it, which is why I'm saying that parents should not think you're immune to these side effects, the mal effects, the poisonous effects of screens and apps, because there's clear studies now demonstrating it might, even if it's not digital dementia, there will be evidence in those spend hours and hours of abnormalities. I can guarantee you that. Whatever you might call the diagnosis, there will be abnormalities in your brain if people spend their entire recreational time in front of screens and don't do anything else.
And I think we might have our last question here. And it's a pertinent one. How can we as parents and professionals make more noise about this to the government?
That's a really good question, because they seem completely and utterly tone deaf at the moment. Write to your MPs. If you have any contacts in the media, bottom line is government listens to the MPs and the media. More than the MPs, it's the media. If there's a groundswell amongst the media, and the government sees a lot of articles, like there's quite a lot in the broadsheets, but it needs to be in the tabloids as well. That's when the government will sit up and take notice. We've done lots of lobbying of the government. The so-called Safe Phones bill that is going through Parliament is a joke. It's completely impotent. So there has to be a mass mobilization of opinion against the poisoning of our children, and then hopefully, but you see, it's not just that. Parents have got to lead at home, because the government will one day, I'm pretty certain, at some point ban phones in schools. However, that leaves the rest of the day, and lots of teachers are telling us that children are like this because of what they're seeing at home. That needs to change, which is why I said there needs to be societal change. Parents need to realize they're doing it for themselves as well as their children. That's really important.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Nishani. It's been incredibly insightful, and this is the second time I've seen you present, and yeah, it does make me want to go downstairs and have a long talk with my kids. And as a parent myself, I know how frustrating and it's really difficult topic, and we need to get on top of it. Yes, but thank you for your advice and your evidence-based research that really sort of backs up everything that you've talked about tonight. So yes, thank you. You're getting lots of rounds of applause in the chat. Yes, so thank you very much. As I mentioned, we will be sending the recording of this around to everybody tomorrow, and also we'll share the slides as well. I've just put a feedback form in the chat. It'd be fantastic if you could click on it and share your thoughts on tonight's webinar. And on that feedback form, there's also a section where you can sort of suggest any future webinars that you might like around sort of health and mental well-being that we can sort of put on for you. But thank you for coming along for this evening on what turned out to be a sunny evening, which was quite nice. So we'll let you get out into the gardens and the fresh airs and off the screens. So thank you for attending, and thank you very much.